Welcome to our group presentation. My name is Jordan, and today Danielle, Reed, Abby, and myself will be discussing the topics covered in Chapter 9, The Spread. Now, our chapter begins with introducing us to two important concepts. The first concept is bounty. Bounty is the great economic consequence of the exponential, digital, and combinatorial process taking place at present. A great example of bounty is the evolution of photography. More photos are now taken every 2 minutes than in all the 19th century. Instagram sold to Facebook for $1 billion just 15 months after its founding, and Kodak filed for bankruptcy just a few months before that. The second key concept of this chapter is called spread, which means there are large and growing differences among people in income, wealth, and other important circumstances in life. Throughout the 8 subsections of our chapter, along with the concepts of spread and bounty, our authors will challenge two widespread worldviews. The first is the notion that advances in technology will always boost income. And second is that automation hurts workers' wages as people are replaced by machines. Our first subsection of the chapter is How is the Median Worker Doing, which focuses on the growing variance of the income inequality between the average American and the top 1% of the country. The median income has gone down in our country from $54,932 in 1999 to $50,054 in 2011, despite the overall GDP hitting a record high. Wages of unskilled workers in the US and other advanced countries have also been trending downward. Meanwhile, over half the total income in the US went to the top 10% of Americans in 2012. The top 1% earned over 22% of income, more than doubling their share since the early 1980s. The top 100th of the 1% of Americans, now 5.5%. Several other metrics, such as life expectancy for some groups, have also been increasingly unequal. These growing variances have sparked two major movements on both sides of the political field: the Tea Party movement on the right and the Occupy movement on the left. Both movements challenged the anger of millions of Americans who felt the economy wasn't working for them. Our next subsection, How Technology is Changing Economics, dives into the more fundamental challenge that is the result of the diffusion to the second machine age technologies that increasingly drive the economy. Technology has shown to drive our American economy, but also has put strict competition between machines and hardworking Americans. For example, human tax preppers have had a hard time competing with machines. They can be made worse off by advances in technology, not just relative to the winners, but also relative to their income when they are working with older technologies. The best example of the competition for our tax preppers is an accounting software company called TurboTax. It takes only a relatively small number of designers and engineers to create and update a program like TurboTax. Once algorithms are digitalized, they can be replicated and delivered to millions of users at almost zero cost. As software moves to the core of every industry, this type of production process and this type of company increasingly is common in our popular American economics.
Next up is the subsection, A Smaller Slice of a Bigger Pie. As graphically represented, we can see that Americans overall have been getting wealthier. However, a closer look reveals that the median income hasn't been following along with that trend. In fact, recently the bottom 80% are seeing a net decrease in their wealth. So if the real GDP per capita is increasing, but the median income per capita is decreasing, then who is this wealth going to? To put it simply, the wealthy are getting wealthier. Productivity has been steadily increasing, but the growing gap between the two lines on the graph tells us that inequality is really what's increasing here. In other words, as incomes become more skewed, the mean diverges further and further away from the median. Inequality can prevent people with lower incomes and less wealth from getting an education, which in turn results in less innovation and entrepreneurship. This is bad because technological innovation is the single largest driving factor of today's economy, and if that comes to a halt, then so will our economy. Moving on to the subsection, the three pairs of winners and losers. Exponential, digital, and combinatorial change in the technology that undergirds our economic system is the main driver of growing inequality, which in turn has created three overlapping pairs of winners and losers. The first two sets of winners are those who have accumulated significant quantities of the right capital and assets. The third group of winners is made up of the superstars among us, who have special talents or luck. The increases in economic payoff to winners explains the growing inequality, because the overall gains to winners are larger than the total losses for everyone else. The potential negative impacts here are the same as in the previous slide.
For skill-biased technical change, the net effect has been to decrease demand for less skilled labor, while increasing the demand for skilled labor. This favors people with more human capital. Then came the massive oil shock and recession of the 1970s. We began seeing a growing spread of incomes. Workers with college degrees were doing notably better than workers without college degrees. There was a large increase in the supply of educational labor, which actually didn't push down the relative wages like it should have. The combination of higher pay despite growing supply can only mean that the relative demand for skilled labor increased even faster than supply. The demand for tasks that could be completed by high school dropouts fell so rapidly that there was a glut of this type of worker, even though their ranks were thinning. The lack of demand for unskilled workers meant even lower wages for those who continue to compete for low-skilled jobs. Because most of the people with the least amount of education already had the lowest wages, this change increased overall income inequality. This leads to the next point of organizational co-invention. Companies use digital technologies to reorganize decision-making authority, incentive systems, information flows, hiring systems, and other aspects of their management and organizational processes. This co-invention of organization and technology not only significantly increased productivity, but tended to require more educated workers and reduce demand for less skilled workers. This reorganization affected those who worked directly with computers, as well as workers who seemed to be far from technology. Each dollar of computer capital was often the catalyst for more than $10 of the complementary investments in organizational capital, or investments in training, hiring, and business process redesign. The reorganization often eliminates a lot of routine work, leaving behind a residual set of tasks that require relatively more judgment, skills, and training. Companies with the biggest IT investments typically make the biggest organizational changes, usually with a lag of 5 to 7 years before seeing the full performance benefits due to the time that it takes for managers and workers to figure out new ways to use the technology. These companies had the biggest increase in the demand for skilled work relative to unskilled work. Creativity and organizational redesign are crucial to investments in digital technologies. The best way to use new technologies is to not make a literal substitution of a machine for each human worker, but to restructure the process. Some workers are still eliminated from the production process, and others are augmented with predictable effects on the wage structure. Now Abby is going to tell you about the skill set affected by computerization.
The skill set affected by computerization is evolving and changing every day. Automation began by making simple jobs quicker, more efficient, and more accurate. Nowadays, automation is taking over jobs that are routine tasks such as sorting information and collecting customer data. According to two MIT researchers, all work can be divided into a 2x2 matrix, which consists of cognitive versus manual and routine versus non-routine. Demand for work had been falling most drastically for routine tasks, regardless of whether they are cognitive or manual. Computers used to take over jobs that were primarily manual. However, as computers get smarter, they are more capable of doing both manual and cognitive jobs. This creates a lower demand for routine jobs since computers can take them over. Next, we're going to talk about labor and capital. As automation becomes more prevalent among routine jobs, unemployment becomes more widespread. Work that is substitutable by robots have a downward pressure on human wages, meaning their jobs are not worth as much. Conversely, work that is not substitutable by robots is becoming more and more valuable. The fall of labor's share is in part the consequence of two trends. Fewer people are working, and wages for those who are working are lower than before. all due to the increase of automation. In conclusion, Chapter 9 is very relevant to the conceptual framework of this course. The theme of this chapter is that machines and automation are taking over jobs, thus changing median incomes in today's society. This directly correlates to the computing power box of the three technology invariants. As computing power becomes more powerful, we have to learn to adapt accordingly. As mentioned in the TED Talk we watched for week 1, when jobs are taken over by automation, there's more room for invention and new job creation. The immediate consequences of computing power are illustrated through this chapter by technology-mediated spaces. For instance, the convenience of photography has been increased through the digitization of technology. However, it has profoundly changed the economics of photography production and distribution. All of the potential business moves are relevant in Chapter 9 because it focuses on automation, and automation leads to information and then transformation. The future of technology is unknown. However, we must weigh the benefits and consequences of the advancements as we move forward. Thanks for listening.